that struggles very hard to bring together the three main influxes of Hispanic culture, which is Spanish culture per se, Latin American culture, which is talking about 22 nations once again, and then what is happening with the Latinos of the United States. The Latinos of the United States, roughly 45 million. Again, let's look at the census. We will be shocked, I am sure. They approximately, I don't know the exact terms because many of them are illegal and the figures are not easy to pinpoint, but not all of them at all speak Spanish. However, Spanish is being reinforced in a number of very interesting details. One of them is the retention of pride. Let me use only my own experience as 23 years here. When I came here and then went to a deli and they were doing their transactions there and saw me addressing them in Spanish, the reaction was, who is this guy talking to me in my language? And they would answer in English. Like, Spanish is our little secret. We don't perceive you as Latino. Where are you from? And there is a very interesting moment in Hunger of Memory, the autobiography of Richard Rodriguez, I think it is. I hope I'm not changing any name, where he is one of the first Latinos ever to have gotten a PhD in English literature. He was so proud of this. And in his memoirs, he is describing how he is in the British Museum and he's doing research for his dissertation when he sees a group of people a few tables away doing scholarly work and holding a discussion in Spanish. He was shocked. Spanish was the language of poverty, of crime, all these things. And this was just a team of Argentinian archaeologists. So he came to the absurd realization that there were other levels of sophistication, culturally speaking, for the language. It was a shock for him. Another shock for him was that he looked at his face in the mirror, he saw that he was brown, and he wanted to be white. It is the same, and he tried to be white chemically, but you cannot do that. So the two things go together, and what I have observed in just 22 years, 23 years, is that there is now a pride in the use of Spanish. No longer are the Latinos ashamed of this language as they were before. The government acknowledges this in very vague ways. If you want, I mean, if you have such a huge population and they have the right to vote, you'd better make sure, and Obama made sure that it happened, that they understand what you have to say to them. So they have their website in Spanish, like Walt Disney Inc. You have to have the language of the people. I mean, they need to be addressed in their own language. They were saying that about other countries in Asia and Africa. What is interesting is that all of this is happening in this city and in this country, and it's a phenomenon that it is not sufficiently well studied. There's going to be the opening of a very important exhibit in New York City, which is called Nueva York. There's a lot, I would say, with of ignorance in terms of the cultural and the historical past of the United States, which has not yet been adequately written, because it is written exclusively from the, so to speak, Anglo point of view. So, which has nothing to do with anything. That is the tradition, the continuation of a tradition that is first British and has a continuation in the United States. Now, the Spanish element, and not only the element constituted by the Latinos, but the Spanish per se element, those who founded the missions in California, those who came here before, has not been sufficiently studied. And this is what a number of exhibits has been doing in the past, and this is what Nueva York is going to be a revelation, like there was recently, a few years ago, an exhibit about slavery. It's just I mean, New Yorkers will be shocked to see the huge proportion of their cultural past, how Hispanic it was in many terms, meaning that if Spanish is around with the strength that we hear, it's not just something that happened out of sheer coincidence. We work in three directions at Instituto Cervantes in New York. One is the class program. The reason why people study Spanish in the United States fundamentally is not because they want to acquire yet another cultural language of prestige, as I said before. It is mainly because it is of the essence for professionals to communicate with those segments of the population that don't speak English sufficiently well. Doctors, lawyers, organizations, private organizations, bankers, etc. That is one important part. The other part is that they are interested in Latin American culture and Spanish as well. The situation of Instituto Cervantes is very interesting in many ways because Spain is both part of the Latin American global Hispanic consortium, but it remains a European nation. And nowadays, thanks to diplomatic efforts, there is a good relationship between the two sides of the Atlantic. For instance, 2010 marks the anniversary, the bicentennial of many independence of Latin American countries. And this is something that Spain is celebrating. Of course, it couldn't be otherwise, and this is the occasion for many conventions and conferences. So that is the cultural background from which we operate and towards which we have to look at.
Eduardo, I wonder if I could intervene. Could you perhaps, I want to make sure we have a little bit of time for questions.
Yes.
If you could wrap it up in about a minute, would that be all right?
Yes,
thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sorry.
So, finally, what I would like to say is that in our cultural program, we have to take into account the diversity of Latinos in New York City. So, the mistake I mentioned before from the New York Times, regularly we receive calls from the consulates of Latin American countries saying, can we hold the conference on Peruvian poetry and things like that? And very much we want to work in that direction. Sorry it took so much time.
No, it was very interesting. Thank you very much. Let me ask, we are now about 9:30, which is, in theory, we started a bit late. Can we have another 10 minutes, or should we make it 5 minutes, or how much time can we take?
Do another 10.
Another 10, all right. John.
Well, first I'd like to thank, I'm John Radamus.
Thank you very much. First, I'd like to thank you, Frank, and all of the participants in this panel for a most interesting discussion. That particularly in view of Mr. Lagos' statement, I should note, because it has not been noted, that we have established here at New York University the King Juan Carlos I of Spain Center. As president of the university, I brought the king over and gave him an honorary degree and created a chair in his name and a center, which is where I make my office. Escribí mi disertación doctoral sobre el movimiento anarquista en España, y por eso. I wrote my PhD on the anarchist movement in Spain, and I like to say I studied anarchism, but I didn't practice it because immediately I started running for Congress. But I simply want to say how pleased I am that you are all here and express my gratitude to Frank for having shared this discussion. I yield back the balance of my time, as we said.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Okay, I was going to just, and I want this to be brief among the panels. I was told that and I'm only going to do one question for the panels, and then I simply want to open it up to anybody else who has a thought. And then if each of you respond to my one question to each of you, it could be no more than a minute each, if we could do something like that. Eduardo, you quoted Don Quixote in terms of freedom and tolerance. Rachel, you talked about that interest and curiosity have to be two ways. And Rochelle, you talked about the importance of changing curricula and I'm now going to use UNESCO terms so that there's education for all, that cuts across. I would like to ask each of you, in whichever order, to say what program, and I'm not talking about necessarily a program of any of your organizations, what program or what activities are out there that achieve these three things, how and why? 1 minute each. Who wants to start?
To achieve
Okay.
all three, the
Tolerance,
tolerance and the...
tolerance, the interest and curiosity being two ways, which is really a precursor of tolerance to some degree. And then, how do you get this into the curriculum? How do you change the curriculum to have an education that provides for this? Uh-oh. I'm going to turn to the audience. Please, Eduardo.
The PEN International Festival, the World Voices Festival of International Literature, run by PEN, I think that is, which is coming up at the end of this month. There will be about 60 sessions, 12 of them at Instituto Cervantes. I would also like to say that besides the King Juan Carlos, there are many important institutions working in the same directions as we do, like the Queen Sofia Spanish Institute, the Hispanic Society of America, and el Museo del Barrio, for instance.
Anybody else want to comment on this? I'll comment on it before I'm done, but because let me turn to others.
I think that there's some amazing work that's happening that as I mentioned, at grassroots levels. And I'm just so struck by the work of, and a lot of them are also very young people who are working across urban, rural divides and trying to reach people. They're kind of, bringing in this kind of cultural dimension, but it's very creative, it's very entrepreneurial, without necessarily something that is going to be a huge consumer effort. And so I just wanted to bring those efforts up. And I think that the connecting between artists that is going on has also been very powerful. We brought up the Silk Road project, but there are other projects that maybe don't have quite as much prominence that have been extremely powerful in terms of connecting people and in terms of connecting communities. I won't go into the details of those, although that's where the juicy stuff is, of course, because I only have this, few seconds. But I think that our efforts to really showcase that, and how we can get the media to be our partners in this, so that those efforts are really highlighted, will make a big difference.
Comment?
I tend to talk fast, I apologize, but I've got three things I just thought of while I was listening and thinking.
Great.
One is actually this, which I forgot to mention. 2010, by a UN resolution, has been declared the International Year for the Rapprochement of Cultures. UNESCO is the lead agency. It was actually Kazakhstan who initiated this and made a General Assembly resolution out of it. So the Rapprochement of Cultures, and through UNESCO, we're inviting all member states to follow a program of action, but it also invites NGOs, individuals, universities, mayors, just the 4 points of the plan of action for this international year. Promoting reciprocal knowledge of cultural, ethnic, linguistic, and religious diversity, building a framework for commonly shared values, strengthening quality education and building intercultural competency, and fourth, fostering dialogue for sustainable development. So I invite any of you as a young person or as an academic professor to go out and try and initiate some kind of activity which uses this international year, which is declared by the UN, as a platform to think about intercultural dialogue and mutual respect. The second example I was thinking of is the AFS, the American Field Service. I've come to know them while I've been in New York, and I think that's an amazing, long-standing US initiative whereby you have international exchange students who work and study and live with a family overseas, but they really take that material and they also build in a curriculum of developing young leaders who have had this kind of international experience. So I really recommend looking at AFS. And the third thing that I thought of just instantly was initiatives like this program today, what NYU is doing, the opportunity that you as students have here to listen to people like us, but to have a curricula that really embraces these issues and makes it a fact, a current day issue, an important issue in your personal development, but in the development of this country and of the international community. So I'd like to again thank the organizers for this, but this right here is a good example and what NYU is doing. So those are my three thoughts.
Thank you very much, Rochelle. Let me turn it. I'll yield and defer, John. Yes, ma'am. You raised your hand.
Thank you.
And it doesn't have to be just on this question that I asked, but anything you want to ask or talk about.
Hello. Hi, my name's Jerry Ekdahl, and I'm with NYU Center for Global Affairs. I'm a graduate student here. Thank all of you for your wonderful presentations. I have a brief two-part question. First, for Mr. Hodsall, I was going to ask you specifically about, since you mentioned there has not been a lot of collaboration between, it doesn't sound like there's been a lot of collaboration between Department of Defense and Department of State. Department of Defense is doing a lot of things the right way. How might there be in the future opportunities for information sharing between those two agencies? And the second question is on a topic that I have not heard a lot about, is online social networking, Facebook and Twitter and these kinds of websites. And anyone who would like to comment on that as an important keystone of citizen diplomacy. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I'll deal the DoD state collaboration. There is a pretty good, there's a working group commissioned by both the Secretaries of State and Defense that are working on this. Undersecretary McHale for Public Diplomacy at the State Department is the lead person there, and the Undersecretary for Policy, Michel Flournoy, is the lead person in DoD. The DoD Undersecretary has an extraordinary senior advisor by the name of Rosa Brooks, who is involved with this, and she does an extraordinarily good job at it. There's a lot of agreement as to what ought to happen theoretically. The question is whether the theory can be translated into practical reality, and that really does remain to be seen. On the online social networks, everybody is trying. Governments are very poor at this. People out there are much better at it, and it's everybody in terms of people out there. But maybe some of my fellow panelists would like to comment on the social network.
Well, I'll just mention that has taken off in a really big way in Indonesia. Facebook, I was told, was one of the, I think it's the fourth largest in Indonesia, and it's a place where arts communities are really vibrant, of various sorts. And I think that there is a tremendous interest in figuring out how to do that intra-regionally as well. Some of that, of course, is language dependent, so that and by default at the moment, it seems that it's largely English-based, so that's something of a challenge. But I think there's a real interest in sort of building a variety of different kinds of communities, and that's really taking place, and the fact that it can allow, whether that's YouTube or the social networking specifically, people are really connecting, and more for those of us who are working in the arts, and I see my colleagues from MAP, work is being shared online. So artists are sharing their work explicitly, virtually, and it's really been a game changer. And some of those specifics we haven't really gotten into in this forum, but that's a really interesting and very vibrant place where new interactions